pleasure to be back. It would be lovely if I could see some faces just so I, I could know who I'm speaking to. I recognize Daniel P. and Roman and Becky. Um, can I just ask everyone who's here, who was here last week, just so I know how much to go over? If you were here last week, can you just let me know if you were here, either by unmuting yourself or putting in the chat box? Who was here last week?
I see a few people who were last week, so maybe about half were here and half I think are new.
Okay, so about half are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief review of what we did last week. So this is a two-part series, but you'll still be able to understand today's shiur without listening to last week. So I'm going to give a brief summary of what we discussed last week, and then we're going to go through the teshuvah, the written teshuvah of the Meiri, and we'll explain that all. So that's going to be our plan for this afternoon here in England. So for those who weren't here last week, I'm from London, a rabbi in the Spanish and Portuguese community, and it's my pleasure to be able to share with you some Torah. In fact, today I'm speaking to you, for those in England will appreciate, speaking to you from Bournemouth in south of England, right on the border of England, and just spending a few days here after Pesach. So that's where we are, right on the sea. You may even be able to see it in the background behind me. Okay, that's literally where we are, and that's where we're giving the shiur from this afternoon. So let's get down to what we were learning about last week. So last week we explained. Now we were going to go through the teshuvah of the Meiri. The Meiri, his name is Menachem ben Shlomo, and he lived from the middle of the 13th century to the beginning of the 14th. He died 1305. And the Meiri, he was very much the style of the Rambam. The Rambam we viewed as his teacher. And we explained last time that already in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, there was a strong influence from the Arab countries, from the Greek and Arab philosophy, which had filtered into the south of Spain, Andalusia, and that had strongly influenced the philosophy of the Hachamim living in the south of Spain, Andalusia. And in 1147, the Jews of Spain, of Andalusia, were exiled, and some of them went up to northern Spain, to Catalonia, whereas the majority of them went to Languedoc. Languedoc is the south of France, where you have there Toulouse, you have Narbonne, you have Montpellier, Béziers, all these kinds of towns in the south of France. They all went and settled into all of these towns. And as this influx of Andalusian Hachamim came in to the south of France, they had a huge influence on the culture of the south of France. And the Hachamim there were very intrigued by these new arrivals and wanted to learn more about their learning. And all of their learning had been in Arabic in the south of Spain. And so they commissioned translators to translate all the works of Rav Sadia Gaon, Rambam, and even philosophical and other kinds of works were translated. And that's how the knowledge and the wisdom of the Hachamim of Andalusia became accessible to the Hachamim of Languedoc. This was all happening from the 1150s all the way through till the date of our Teshuvah, which is 1305. Now, so just a quick reminder of the map. Let me just show you the map once more. On the screen, I'm going to share the screen. So this is the map which we used last week. So here we are, the Hachamim Andalusia. Some of them are going to northern Spain, Catalonia, but most of them are going here to Languedoc. And there in Languedoc, you have Here, this is Languedoc. Okay, so go on Pellier, Toulouse, Narbonne, Peperian, that's where the Meiri is, Béziers, okay, all this area, that's where they've gone. Now, in the middle of the 13th century, this is in 1232, we have the first major controversy with Rambam. Rambam's already died in 1205, but there's a major controversy where you have the Hachamim of the Northern Europe who are very against Rambam and his philosophy. They burn his books, but it ends up fading away, this ban, and we've forgotten about this now. There isn't a community across the world today which doesn't study Harambam's works, whether it has halachic works, its philosophical works. Harambam became the giant of the last 1,000 years. So that was one major controversy, and we went through that of the 1230s. But then, towards the end of the 13th century, we had another controversy with the Rambam, but it's not about the Rambam so much, it's about how people are using Harambam. So the 1230s, it's a ban on Harambam, it's a ban on philosophy, it's an attack against him. At the end of the 13th century, this is beginning already 2 or 3 years before 1300, then people are becoming agitated that people are misinterpreting and misusing Harambam. And one of these people, one of the main antagonizers is Abba Mari of Lunel, which is in Languedoc. So he comes from a philosophically inclined culture, and he is very upset. He feels that people are misusing Harambam's works, are misusing philosophy generally, and he believes you need a certain maturity to be able to study philosophy and science and these kinds of things. And so he presses the Rashba. The Rashba, Shlomo ben Abraham Aderet, he's living in Catalonia, in the north of Spain, and he pressurizes him to issue a ban against anyone from Languedoc studying philosophy or science, except for medicine. Medicine, one exception, he says you are allowed to, but all other sciences and philosophy under the age of 25. He forbade that. And Rashba initially is hesitant, but by July 1305, he issues this ban, and he puts in harem anyone who's going to study under the age of 25 in Languedoc. And we explained last week that the fact that Abba Mari had to leave his territory of Languedoc, of southern France, to go to Catalonia, to northern Spain, to where the Rashba was living, it's in Barcelona, shows you that he had so little support in Languedoc. No one would support him. And in fact, after this ban was issued, the Hachamim of Languedoc made a counter ban. They said anyone who will dare to follow this ban, i.e., and not to teach their children philosophy or science under the age of 25, then they are going to be put in ban for restricting them from accessing wisdom. So and they also put Abba Mari in harem as well. They say, how dare you give us a bad name in the eyes of Harashba? And they put him in harem. And as a result, Abba Mari reacts, and he puts those who put him in harem into harem. So we have a big harem game here, where on the one hand, you have people putting Abba Mari in harem for defaming the Hachamim of Languedoc to the Rashba. And then you have Abba Mari himself responding with his own harem. This is all getting very tense, and Meiri steps in. Now the Meiri undoubtedly, this is where we left off last week. The Meiri undoubtedly was the greatest authority in Languedoc. And he is now going to try to settle things down and to calm everyone down. And he's going to write a letter to Abba Mari himself. So Meiri is in Peperian. So let's see this map again on the screen. Okay, I appreciate not everyone's from Europe, and for some Americans, the ins and outs of Europe, France, and Spain, you need to see it on the map. For us, it's more common, France and Spain. But here you are on the map. Meiri is over here in Peperian, right on the southern border of France. Rashbaz here in Barcelona, and he's writing to Abamari, who's in Lunel. Lunel is next to Montpellier. Okay, so not too far away, and he's writing this letter to him, and that's the Teshuvah which we're going to examine this evening. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen, and we're going to go through it, okay, through most of it. Feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. You don't understand anything. The Meiri writes very flowery and sometimes quite poetically. So we will go through most of it and we'll try to explain it. But again, feel free to ask any questions which are unclear, anything which you want further elaboration on. So says let's read the Teshuvah. Teshuvah leRabbeinu be'inyan herem ha'aderabah ve'limud ha'chochmot. This is a response to Abamari regarding this counterban, and generally speaking, the idea of studying other philosophy. And this is other wisdoms, including philosophy and science. And this is going to be a really important teshuvah for a number of reasons. Number one, we're going to see from the viewpoint of the Hachamim of the Meiri and of Languedoc, the importance which they ascribed to philosophy and science. We're also going to talk about jurisdiction. What jurisdiction does one community have upon another? And also allegorization of the Torah. How far do you go with regards to allegorizing the Torah? All of these issues are going to be discussed here. So writes the Meiri, Yamim Rabbim lanu higanu shem'acha. For many years, probably, we've heard about your name. We've seen that you've acted with a strong hand, which has been great, and to try to prevent the sermonizers. What's he talking about here? The Meiri here is referring to the rabbis who would take certain things in the Rambam and extend it far beyond what the Rambam meant, and to allegorize the Torah. And Meiri himself was uncomfortable with that, with the extreme allegorization which was happening. And so he tells Abamari, this is a great way, this is just a general thing to remember for life. When you want to criticize someone, first start with some compliments. And that's exactly what Meiri does here. He's going to give Abamari a scathing attack soon. But before he does that, he's going to first lay on the praise to Abamari and tell him, look, I heard what you've been doing, which has been fantastic. You've been trying to stop these sermonizers in Baskama, in Baherem or Ba'ala, through Cherems, in Vatam Mikol Mikol. Either you try to prevent them completely, in Vatam Sheidabru Bahem Rak Min HaTorah Vatam Midrash, or you're trying to minimize what they're speaking about. לפעמים באור הגדה בסעודת החוכמה, בדבר שאין בו הריסה או גילוי סוד בסעודת הרבואה. As a result, preventing them from talking about things which won't end up actually breaching and going against the secrets of our Torah and prophecy. So when I heard this, I'm in Peprian, and you're with them in Montpellier, when I heard this, I was absolutely delighted. In fact, we praised you, and we talked very highly of you. We said that through you we'll be able to be calm, and Hashem will cool us down from all the terrible things that are happening. Good things happen through good people. So, and one more sentence. And we waited. We were in anticipation that your intention would actually happen. And we would delight in this. And whenever we mentioned you, we talked about you in high regard, and we have great love for you. So, starting very complimentary. And Meiri agrees with Abamari. There is a danger of misapplication of allegory of the Torah. And he feels the publicity of allegorization of the Torah is too crude. It's not good that people are just coming and saying this refers to that, and this refers to this. And people aren't taking the Torah literally anymore. Meiri is happy, Abamari, and says, what you're doing is a great job. Continue what you're doing, fantastic. And I'm very happy with you. But then he gets down to the main reason why he's writing to Abamari. He says, "Ba'avur yamim u'chodashim," when a few days or months passed, עוד אנחנו מדברים וזה בא, but then we hear a new message. ויאמר כי כאשר לא נעשתה עצתך לשעתה, כי כאשר לא נעשתה עצתך לשעתה, when your plan was not actually accomplished, meaning that although you tried to get this to happen, that people would limit the amount of their allegorization, you started to make the land tremble, literally. It's quoting a pasuk in Tehillim. But basically, is that you started to cause a lot of trouble. In front of Rabbeinu Harav, you brought this controversy. Who's Rabbeinu Harav? This is the Rashba. So the Meiri gives Rashba great importance. And he's, the Rashba was clearly the halachic authority of northern Spain. Meiri was the halachic authority of southern France. But they both treat each other with great respect. And Meiri is writing to Abamari saying, why did you take it to the Rashba? The Mishpat Samta, for his judgment, to hand over the wisdom of philosophy to the people who are going to spoil it? And he writes, the Meiri next paragraph, despite the fact that the Rashba is a father for us all, no one can open his mouth against Harashba. That there's no debating that. But you also need to appreciate that in these kinds of things with philosophy, people have different approaches. Why are you bringing the Rashba into the picture? The Rashba has a whole different viewpoint, it's a whole different philosophy. For him, it's all about Kabbalah. He's rejected philosophy. V'rov inyanei philosophia etzlam sadeh v'sadatino malachi habara. Beautiful. Says the Meiri to Abamari, he says, no one's going to doubt Rashba's halachic authority and how great he is. But at the same time, you need to appreciate that Rashba comes from a different culture. We, the Hachamim of Languedoc, we are steeped and immersed in science and philosophy. Whereas Rashba, they've rejected this all. He comes from the culture where it's all about Kabbalah. Because if you remember, we discussed last week, what's clear in the Gemara is that there is a concept called Maaseh Bereshit. And the question is, Maaseh Bereshit is like a very high level of learning. You can't teach it publicly. The restrictions, how you learn it. Maaseh Bereshit. What does Maaseh Bereshit mean? In Rambam's philosophy and his students, all of Languedoc, including Abamari, Maaseh Bereshit means the study of philosophy and science, coming to an understanding of God. In Rashba's philosophy, though, and he wrote this to Abamari, it's for him, it's got nothing to do with philosophy or science. It's more got to do with Kabbalah. And so the Meiri is telling Abamari, it was great what you tried to do, but why, when things didn't work out for you and people are listening to you, why did you take this problem to the Rashba? The Rashba comes from a different culture, a different philosophy, and therefore you should not have been bringing this to the Rashba. Okay, is that clear so far? Anyone want to raise any comments so far? Feel free to do so. So, and then the Meiri continues, and he says one more sentence, Hatzoriem begilad imrofe en sham. So here he's quoting the pasuk in Yirmiyah, where he says, is there no balm, is there no tsari in Gilad, is there no doctor there? Meaning, do we not have our own Hachamim here in southern France? We are full of Hachamim, and he's going to mention them soon. We're full of them here. So why are you taking this issue down to the Rashba, down to Spain? And he elaborates now. So they came to us from some honorable people from the mountain. What's this mountain? This mountain is Montpellier. So if you remember, we said that Meiri is in south of France, right in the south. Let's just share the screen again. We'll see the map once more. So Meiri is here in Peperian. Montpellier was called on the mountain. Montpellier is on the mountain. Right? In fact, there are many Baalei Tosfot who are called the rabbi from the mountain, Min Hahar, Shva Min Hahar. So Meiri says, so this is a messenger coming from Montpellier down to the Meiri in Peperian. Let's go back to the Teshuvah. And he says, they came for the wedding of the Honorable Don Shmuel Natan. I don't know who he is. And also who came was Yitzhak Delates. And they came with some letters. And this Hacham Yitzhak Delates asked me about what my opinion was about what has happened. That you had taken this to the Rashba. Already in Montpellier, people were astounded by what you'd done. He hadn't heard my opinion down in Peperian. He asked my opinion. I was also furious. And this was very strange to me. According to what kind person you are, how could you do this? Look at this next sentence. To go and defame and embroil in controversy a land which takes 10 days to traverse. It's a big place, not talking about a tiny place. Mudat beyachas ve'osher ve'chokhma u'b'chol minei ma'ala, which is known for its lineage, is known for its wealth, it's known for its wisdom and all many other beneficial points. Why did you go and defame such a place, the whole of Languedoc, basically, lifnei ma'alat Rabbeinu Harav, in front of the Rashba, asher hu shakul etzenu k'shishim ribo, who is valuable to us like 600,000 people. And why did you take this to Spain? And the Hachamim of Montpellier are furious about this. And they would have started a fight. Only because it's the Rashba who put this ban forward. That's the reason why they haven't actually come out in full force. What they're saying is, the Hachamim of Montpellier is that if there's a problem, tell us about it. Why are you taking it to our father? Why are you taking it to the Rashba? All the towns around Montpellier are all very angry about this, and it's very bad in their eyes. So Meiri is telling Abamari that you should know that what you've done has infuriated the Hachamim of Languedoc, of Montpellier, of Peperian. They don't understand. Why have you gone and defamed Languedoc, which is known for its chokhmah, it's known for its lineage, it's known for its wealth, and all these great things? You go and defame it to the Rashba and make it out to the Rashba as if we're some troublesome area. Why have you done this? Why didn't you try to settle it internally? So basically, Meiri is arguing the Rashba lacks jurisdiction. In essence, that's what he's saying. The Rashba doesn't have jurisdiction to get involved, especially for something which is when it comes from such a different culture to us. Now, Meiri brings up now the first controversy with Rambam in the 1230s, which we went through last week. And he says, it's worthwhile reminding ourselves what happened in the 1230s. When we heard when the Rambam's works were becoming widespread, people started to burn them. Who can begin to evaluate the damage, the pain, the embarrassment which emerged through that? How wrong was that? We are here afraid in Peperian. We are concerned about you starting another fight. And then he goes and says, והנה יד שלוחה אלינו והנה בהגנת ספר התיקון ברצון מאוחרנו שלחו שמה וכתוב בו שהקהל הקדוש ברצלונה יחרימו כל איש מאנשי קהילם שם הטבע ולאות בכל מלחמת שנה. And now we've received this letter which came from Barcelona from the Rashba, that they put in Harem anyone from our community, from their community, but also ours, who will learn science and philosophy under the age of 25. And also, we've also been told that you told in a letter to the Rashba שאחר פטירת אחד מן החכמים, after the death of one of the great rabbis, who's known by us in Languedoc as being a person of great piety and fear of sin, that you told him that they found in his writings, his private writings, they found that he had written that Abraham and Sarah allude to Chomer and Surah, which means Chomer is matter and Surah is form. Yeah, that the tribes refer to the 12 constellations. So this is something very interesting. And the Chacham he's referring to is the Chacham called Rav Yaakov Anatoli. Rav Yaakov Anatoli wrote a book called Malmad HaTalmidim. And in this book, he theorizes that certain things in the Torah can be understood allegorically. Now, he never said that Abraham and Sarah themselves are fictional and they are only allegorical. What he does say is that these things can be viewed as being a metaphor for Chomer and Surah. He writes, for example, that Lot and his wife symbolizes the intellect and the body. He says the 7-branched menorah in the Mishkan represents the 7 planets. The 12 tribes are the 12 constellations. The Urim and the Tumim of the Kohen Gadol represent the astrolabe. So various things he allegorized. And the Abamari wrote to the Rashba basically implying that this Hacham, Rav the Malmad Talmidim, Rav Anatoli, was basically saying heretical ideas. But we know him to be such a great and God-fearing person. How could you speak about him like that to the Rashba? So another reason, so he's upset for 2 reasons. Number one, he's upset saying that, why have you caused the Rashba to make this ban? The Rashba doesn't understand what's going on with us. And secondly, why are you misfeeding him information and bringing a bad name about our Hachamim, especially of Yaakov Anatoli? And the next paragraph, he just says that, you've taken away your attention from the important thing. The important thing, which I agreed with you in the beginning, was that these people were crudely sermonizing and allegorizing the Torah. That was our initial attention. And now that's gone. We've gone on to something else now, banning people from learning philosophy and science at all. That's wrong. And then he says the next paragraph, I know people have now started talking badly about our Hachamim in the south of France. And look at this last 2 lines here. V'osifa divrehem pesha lemor. And they even ventured to say something so terrible. Ki miyom hitpashet ha'chokhmah ba'aretz. From the day that wisdom, that philosophy began to infiltrate Languedoc, i.e. from 1147, batla hasidut v'yirat het. Piety and the fear of sin became abolished. Apparently, people are saying about Languedoc. And by the way, you have to remember, we're talking about our huge Hachamim, the Meiri, right? And all of his contemporaries living in Languedoc who are all being besmirched by people saying that from the time that in Languedoc they started to study philosophy, people are no longer pious and are no longer God-fearing. But the Meiri says it's nonsense. You know very well, Abamari, that's not the case. You know very well there's lots of fear of God here. Yesh v'yesh, there is certainly lots of eternity. Give us your hand and come and join us. You know that well. And now, okay, so that's so far. Now he addresses an interesting issue. He says, look, it is true that when studying too much philosophy, you can end up reading things which are wrong. So maybe you have a point, Abamari, that you shouldn't be studying unless you mature, intellectually mature over the age of 25. But that the Meiri says is incorrect. He says, there's no question about it. Philosophy is very precious in our eyes, and there's so much benefit to it. Sometimes there may be problems with it. Maybe sometimes there's something there which is needs to be rectified. It doesn't make so much sense to us. I prefer, says the Meiri, to attribute that to the lack of my intellect. He says, even when I come along, I'm reading one of the works of the Hachamim and I see something which is questionable, I say, look, I'm not clever enough to understand it. I don't start to claim he's got heretical views. And I'm going to go in to try to pluck out the roses. Yeah, take what I can, the good. I'm not going to abandon a book, a beautiful book full of stars, because of one or two or three bad things or three questionable things. And he says sometimes, when you end up delving into the words and you try to give them benefit of the doubt, you see the beauty of it. And so he says, don't worry about the fact that sometimes you may come up to questionable things. That's fine, it happens. When you come to those questionable things, then ignore it, get the main points, and try your best to give it the benefit of the doubt. And look what he says in this next paragraph. This is something which we should always remember. I'm going to read it word for word. Mitzuraf elayot kevod gadol leuma. It's a great honor for a nation. When we have some people, even if it's a few people, it's critical and it's honorable for our nation that there are some people, even if it's few of them, who are perfect, who have a deep grasp of philosophy, so that we won't have a situation where everyone doesn't know anything about philosophy. What's going to be the cause of that? People are going to say that we are a foolish people. So says the Meiri that philosophy, understanding of science, understanding the world around us, this is an essential part of what it means for us to be an honorable nation. And if you're going to ban it for people under the age of 25, you're going to have very few people who are going to be able to be experts in it if you can't study something till the age of 25. And this is going to result in people neglecting it and us not being able to be recognized for our intellectual abilities. And so let's just appreciate this. In Meiri's eyes, one of the greatest Rishonim, for him, if you have a people who are devoid of philosophy, this is an insult to our people. It's an insult to our people in the Meiri's eyes. Very powerful, I think. This really shows you that the viewpoint, the philosophy of the Meiri about philosophy and science. And then he says, look, even if once or twice we'll make a mistake, fine. Or one or two people end up veering off the straight and narrow, fine. So they should be put in harem. But why kill the whole thing? Why kill the whole philosophy? And then he makes a beautiful point. He says, look, we know in the Gemara tells us about Elisha ben Avuya, who entered the orchard, which some explain it to be the Kabbalistic secrets. And we know that he came out and he became a heretic. Did anyone suggest that because he became a heretic, because of his study of Kabbalah, we should ban Kabbalah completely? No one's ever suggested that. So therefore, he says, the same should be the case with philosophy and science. People should study it. And if once or twice people end up like Elisha ben Avuya, veering on the wrong path, then fine. Then those people will be put in harem. But why should we kill Kabbalah? Why should we kill philosophy? Because of the one or two troublemakers. And then he says, look at these next few lines. When Baruch Hashem, we merited to have the works in the books of Harambam. In our provinces, in Languedoc, we have great and established and famous rabbis, experts in all of the Talmud, etc. And at the same time, experts in philosophy and all of its literature. Now he starts to quote. He name drops a few hachamim. He says here, first you have Rav Shmuel Shkil, to be honest, I'm not sure who he is. But then he says of Gershom Mibeziers, he's well known, Gershom Beziers, and a few other Hachamim he lists. He says all of them are great Hachamim and are also experts in the sciences and the philosophy. And even though some people will make a mistake sometimes, okay, those people will ignore, but we have to be able to study these things. So far what we've seen, let's just put it together before we come towards the end. So far we've seen the Meiri agrees with Abba Mari that we have to limit people allegorizing the Torah freely. That can't be allowed to happen. But he says, when you're not happy how things are going, then don't go and cause trouble with the Rashba. Don't go and take our problems to other places and defame us. Rashba comes from a different viewpoint, and he's not the right person to judge in this story. And then he also says, the Meiri, he says that you've already seen how much trouble the earlier controversies have caused, and we are afraid that you're going down the same path. And I don't understand. Why are you looking to ban philosophy because of one or two troublemakers? If you have a problem with them, then let's ban them. But why ban the whole chokhmah? Why ban this whole discipline? If you're going to end up banning this discipline, then we're going to end up being a foolish people. In Meiri's eyes, if Hachamim are not well-versed in the contemporary science and philosophy, then that doesn't look good. You know, if we just step out for a moment from the Meiri and take it to today's age, I know we have more of an American crowd, but just take, for example, who left us very sadly a few months ago, Rabbi Sachs of England, who was well versed in from his books. You know, I never spoke to him in great depth about philosophy, but you just read his books and you see this guy has read all the contemporary philosophy, and just look at the outpouring of love, not just from the Jewish community, but from outside, from great and intellectual people, and they appreciated him for that. And so the Meiri is along the same lines. He's saying, look, it works. It's exactly the same in the Meiri's times. Is that if we have a nation of Hachamim who are unable to be able to have a grasp of basic contemporary science and philosophy, that's not good. It doesn't look good. And then he says there are so many, and then the Meiri says, apart from that fact, he says to actually understand Gemara itself, you can only do so when you have this basic understanding. He says, let me tell you, when I started to learn Eruvin, and I started to learn the Gemara which talks about Sukkah, which is round, right? And all these topics in the Gemara, I was only able to understand it because of what I had studied in maths and geometry, because someone had taught me all of this. Without this, I wouldn't have been able to do so. So why are you saying we should ban these sciences until 25? People are going to become ignorant until then. And then he says, look, I'm going to tell you a few further reasons why I think that what you've done is terrible. This is a bad idea. Firstly, he says, as human beings are different. To issue a straight, we're diverse. To issue a straight out ban on it isn't a good idea. It just doesn't work like that. Secondly, Hashenit, now we have financial problems. It's very difficult financially where we're living. And if someone doesn't learn from a young age the basic sciences, then when he gets older, he won't have the time, because by the time you reach the age of 25, you're married and have children, and you need to bring home a livelihood. You're not going to have the time to be able to immerse yourself in these disciplines adequately. And so he continues. Thirdly, he says, is that it's not always easy to find a teacher for these kinds of things. If you allow a person to study from a young age, hopefully he'll find someone during those first 25 years. If you limit him till 25, then he may not find a teacher when he's able to start at that age. Then in the fourth paragraph, he says, look, if you want to ban this, he says, how are people ever going to understand Moreh Nevuchim? And I want you to look at this sentence here. This is the Meiri writing. And he writes here, please be kind to me and teach me. If we're going to ban it, how are we going to understand the book of the Moreh, the 25 introductions in the second part of the Moreh, Nevuchim, the guide of the Rambam? And look at this next sentence. Well, fundamentals of the Torah depend on that. People won't be able to understand Harambam, Moreh Nevuchim, if they haven't got the basic grasp of philosophy. They're all taken from the contemporary philosophy, says Meiri. So it's ridiculous. You're banning it, but you're going to say you can study the Rambam and also be able to understand the Rambam. So a number of issues he's got, the Meiri. He's saying, firstly, people aren't going to be able to learn at 25. It's too old. And they may not find a teacher. But more importantly, they're not going to be able to learn the basic texts of our Hachamim due to this, due to the lack of being able to study. And then he says something very interesting. And I think this is a powerful paragraph, especially in today's world. And unfortunately, we have sometimes rabbis who forget this. Look at this paragraph. I see another big problem. That's going to be in 10 years' time. A ban works temporarily. But within a few years, people then are going to become inclined to their tendency, which is a natural inclination to study these things. All the more so, he says, something which is not so straightforward that it's forbidden. Within a few years' time, even those who have now accepted this ban, well, because of their desire to be able to study, they will say, it's not so straightforward, it wasn't accepted. They'll start to say it is permissible, and they're going to end up reading it. And this is a great stumbling block, he says. Why is this a great stumbling block? Look at the next paragraph. In the first controversy, in the 1230s with Rambam, they sent to the northern French rabbis, and they made a cherem in the 1230s that no one should ever read the book of the Rambam again. They don't understand. I see people everywhere studying the works of the Rambam now. And I thought it was in harem. Perhaps you're going to tell me, saying this sarcastically, you're going to tell me perhaps that this was revoked. I never heard about that. And the Meiri is saying something very powerful. What he's saying is that don't ban things which people aren't going to listen to. Right? There's a concept in the Gemara, you don't decree something people aren't going to listen to. Because why make a ban about something or decree something which people are not going to end up doing? And so this is something which people are going to end up doing. And you are lowering the authority and the stature of the Hachamim in the eyes of the people when you say it's banned and then everyone ends up doing it. Just like 70 years ago, everyone said the Rambam's works are banned, and now everyone reads the works of the Rambam. So what does that say about the Hachamim at the time who banned it? It doesn't look good at all. I remember I was once speaking to a certain a Haredi rabbi in London, very, very well respected and authoritative here in England. And he was talking about the internet. How, we know that certain Hasidim, for example, have a ban on the internet. And he was being asked by someone why he didn't take a stronger stance on the internet and why he hadn't come out more against that people should be using it less. And he was asked that certain rabbis in America, of Kamenetsky and others, had banned it more strongly. And I remember his response, and it struck me. He said, you have to understand, They are 70, 80 years old, the rabbis which you mentioned. I'm 55 years old. A ban on the internet, to limit it, may work for another 5, another 10 years or so. It's not going to work in 20 years' time, that's for sure. They're not going to be around to see in 20 years' time when everyone's using the internet. So they can make the bans now. But me, I'm 55 and I can't make such a ban, I recognize. And this shows his wisdom and his understanding that you have to take into account the whole situation. And you can't just issue bans if people aren't going to listen to them. And the Meiri is saying the same. You're issuing a ban now on not studying under the age of 25, but people aren't going to listen to it. And he says it's a natural tendency of human beings to want to study these things. So people aren't going to listen to it. It's going to end up being an embarrassment for our hachamim. Therefore, he says, that's why I am against it. I don't advise this. Okay? Fine. So let's just finish that off. So that's what he says. Okay. And then the fourth point he says is that by you, again, it's something you mentioned earlier on, is that by you placing your attention on this and making this ban, you've, because this is another important point, is that no one can focus on too many things at once. Human nature is we focus on one thing, we focus on that, and not other things. And so the Meiri is saying, look, you've put your focus on this now, that no one should study under the age of 25, but you've left the real issue, which is people getting up and sermonizing and allegorizing the Torah as they wish. That was the real issue, which I would have been in full support of you. But that, because you've come out with this, therefore you've made things problematic, and focus is going to be taken away from it. And so, in conclusion, Meiri ends off by saying, I don't understand the way you've behaved. There's a few more, there's another paragraph of the Meiri. I'll show the screen quickly. And there's one other thing I wanted to show you in it. Is it gone? Oh, it seems to have closed. Oh, no, it seems to have gone now. Let me just put it up. Sorry about that. Okay, here we are. Got it back again. So let's just share the screen. Here we are. Yeah. So so that's the fourth thing he says, and then he ends off by saying that very sharply. He says, look at these few sentences. Have you just made things more confusing? Are you trying to create bonfires to make to make even bigger fires, and to raise zealousy? You've come out to seek the nakedness of this land. Why have you made this ban and this counter ban against us until you're dividing Am Yisrael? And basically he says, stay out of this. This has been completely wrong what you've done. And therefore I want to summarize the main points which have come out of the Meiri in his response to Abamari, and what we can learn from it to today. And we'll end with that. Firstly, we see Meiri says something important, and unfortunately, we've seen this over and over again in contemporary controversies. Is that often you have a rabbi say something, and what he says isn't just, you could say, even it's not taken out of context. Let's say the whole shiur is presented, and therefore the words of the shiur are not taken out of context. But what sometimes is taken out of context is the context that the shiur was given in. So if a certain rabbi is speaking to a certain kind of people, a rabbi from a different color or a different group to come and criticize him, that's exactly what the Meiri is saying is wrong here. Is that the Rashba has criticized us because the Rashba comes from a different philosophy. For him, it's all about Kabbalah. He's got no appreciation of science and philosophy. So why are you going to Rashba to cause problems with us here in Languedoc, where we come from a totally different viewpoints? And so that's point number one we need to remember, is that before criticizing someone else, whether it's in Torah or anything else, you have to recognize that they are maybe speaking to a different culture, a different kind of groups. And therefore, when Sephardim criticize Ashkenazim, or vice versa, or Haredim criticize modern Orthodox, or vice versa, right? These things don't work because they're speaking to a certain group, they're speaking to a certain sect. And therefore, that context has to be taken into account. And Meiri is saying exactly the same. He's saying, we believe in philosophy and science, and therefore to bring the Rashba into this is wrong. And therefore, that's number one, jurisdiction. You have to remember jurisdiction you have to take into account context. You can't just bring in someone else from another culture and land to start to write things against who we are. Secondly, he says, second point I want to take out from the Meiri is this idea where he says, the Meiri, that a nation who its sages are not well versed in science and philosophy, that's an embarrassment. That's what the Meiri says, black and white. And he says, therefore, to ban an entire people from studying it until the age of 25, that's wrong. That's not right at all. So that's the second point. How, in the Meiri's eyes, how important the disciplines of philosophy and science were, to the extent that he said that if a nation don't have it, then they are a foolish nation. Thirdly, he said also, even if a certain discipline has its problems, it doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out. Right? So yes, there may be one or two people who are going to be reading these things, or maybe one or two things which are wrong. Fine, but it doesn't mean we block everything. Don't be extreme, right? There's a saying in English: don't throw the water out with the baby with the I've forgotten it now. The water in the bath with the how's it go? It's slipped my mind now. Yeah, that's saying in English.
Don't throw the baby out with the bath water.
Baby out of the bath, exactly. Don't throw the baby out of the bath water. You're right. That's what's happening here. You have a problem, but don't throw the whole thing out. And so you have to recognize that things are nuanced. That's point number 3. Point number 4, which we see from the Meiri, is also the idea that the Rambam's works, the fundamentals of Torah, in Meiri's eyes, the Rambam is an essential part of Torah. Without him, you can't study Torah. And therefore, if you're going to ban philosophy and science, you're going to ban essentially learning Rambam, and that's terrible as well. And the 5th point is the idea that he writes that you can only really understand Talmud with a basic understanding of maths. And unfortunately, certain places, they come to these mathematical Gemarot, they come to these scientific Gemarot, and they just say, okay, we can't learn this, then move on to the next page. And that's tragic. That, you have a situation where people are not able to read basic Gemara, but due to a lack of maths or science. And finally, one further point is what is, and the 6th point is that don't make bans on things that people aren't going to keep. And in Meiri's eyes, a ban on philosophy and science, something which people are naturally not going to be able to keep because people love it. And so you're going to end up causing people to go against the rabbis when knowingly that's going to happen. That's not a good idea. So some very important and contemporary points in this Teshuvah of the Meiri to Abba Mari. It's 700 years old, but there are messages which still are relevant to today. And for me, it was fascinating learning this Teshuvah, just seeing this tension already in those days between, and they're not far from each other, don't forget. Yeah, I know America's huge. Here we're talking about south of France to north of Spain. We're talking about a few hundred miles. That's it. And so different schools of thought, completely different. Rashba in the north of Spain and the Meiri and Co in the south. And how that can affect a whole person's approach to Torah. And I think the main point, if we can take one point out from the whole thing, is that recognize there are different approaches to Torah. And if someone wants to immerse himself fully in Torah, that's his choice. If someone wants to have a balanced approach, like Meiri and his contemporaries, that's also a valid approach. And therefore, we should try to stop denigrating one another and try to learn to live with one another and respect each other's views. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you all for joining, everyone. Wishing you all a Chodesh Tov. It's been a pleasure doing this first series for the Sephardi Brothers of America. Thank you, Ethan, for organizing this. And hope to see you once again in the future.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Becky.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.